this week's video, I'll show you how to avoid color blips when knitting stripes in textured fabrics like ribbing and garter stitch. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. If you've ever knitted a project with stripes, you will have noticed that you get color blips when you change colors. Now, depending on the stitch pattern you're knitting, this may or may not be a problem. When you work in stockinette, the stripes are well defined on the right side of the work, while the blips occur on the wrong side, or the purl side of the fabric. When you work in garter stitch, which is a reversible fabric, you will get blips on one side of the fabric, but not the other if you change colors at the same edge each time. If you work stripes in ribbing, you'll see the blips in the purl columns on both sides of the fabric. If you work your ribbing in a contrast color, you'll notice that when you switch from ribbing to stockinette, at the same time you change the color, the transition will be without blips on the right side, just like when you knit stripes in stockinette. But if you switch from stockinette to ribbing at the same time you switch the color, you will get the blips on both sides of the fabric, just as you do with stripes and ribbing. Well, today I'm going to explain why the blips happen, and then we'll look at ways to control where the blips occur, as well as some strategies for using the blips as a design feature. So let's get started. Here's a swatch of knitting where I've knit one row in purple and the rest in cream. Each stitch consists of three parts. It consists of the legs of the stitch. So in stockinette, we often refer to the V of a stitch. These are the legs. The legs are connected with the head of a stitch. So there's leg, head, leg, and then this stitch is connected to each of these two stitches with a running thread. These are the heads of the stitches, and these are the running threads. So the heads curve downward like a frown, and the running threads curve upward like a smile. So you'll have the head of this white row of stitches is interlocked with the running thread of the purple row of stitches. And then you have the heads of the purple row of stitches are interconnected with the running threads of the row above it. So let's watch what happens when you switch colors when you're knitting versus when you're purling. So right here I've got a few knit stitches, and you can see the color change is really not obvious. Just the stitches on one row are one color, and then the stitches on the needle are another color. But if you look at the back, then you can see those purl blips have already occurred. You can see the gray bumps right below the needle, and then the maroon running thread below that. Wherever the purl bumps are, that's where the color blips will occur when you change colors. So if I were to change color at the same time that I am changing to purling, then you're going to see the blips of color occur on this side of the fabric. So now I'm going to show you what happens if you switch from purling to stockinette at the same time that you switch color versus what happens if you switch from stockinette to ribbing at the same time that you switch color. So I already have ribbing, and now I'm going to join my red color, and I'm going to switch to stockinette. So as the stitches if the gray stitches come off the needle, and I'm creating new pink stitches, what you'll see is that the color change is correct, but what you'll also see is that the knit stitches, or that the gray stitches are no longer being ribbed. The last gray stitches are in stockinette, because what you're working in stockinette are the stitches that are coming off of the needle. These stitches are just becoming potential stitches. They're neither knits nor purls yet. So we continue working these across. So now we get to this stockinette portion, and we want to change to ribbing. So what's happening now is we're doing that situation where we're creating purl stitches on the right side, and we're getting that color transition purl bump effect wherever we work a purl stitch, because the stitches coming off the needle are being purled, and that's going to place the heads of the gray stitches and the running threads of the red stitches on this side of the fabric. Now that happened over here too, it's just that all of the purl bumps were on the back side of the fabric. So that's why this color change situation works where this one doesn't. So what do you do in order to not have that happen? At the color change, you knit across all of the stitches. That will put the color blips on the back side of the fabric. So all of these gray stitches came off the needle as stockinette, and all of the pink stitches are potential stitches. They're neither knits nor purls. And now we can begin the ribbing. So now what you see is that you've begun the ribbing, and the ribbing actually begins in these pink or red stitches. It doesn't begin in the gray stitches. When we switch from ribbing to stockinette, we did get that final row of gray stitches in stockinette, but it's really hard to tell that that's what's going on. So what if you aren't just switching from ribbing to stockinette when you're changing color, but what if you actually want stripes in stockinette fabric? If you continue the ribbing pattern, you're going to get those blips in the purl columns on both sides of the fabric here. But you can create striped fabric in ribbing where there are no color blips. So if you were to just switch color and work in your ribbing pattern, then you're going to get your color blips in the purl columns. So instead what you can do is just knit across all of the stitches when you are working the first row of color. And you want to knit across if you're working a right side row, you'd purl across if you were working on a wrong side row. So this is going to put all of those color blips on the wrong side of the fabric, right here. And then so here's where I just switched the color and kept the ribbing, and you get the color blips. And here is where I worked across in all knit stitches and then resumed the ribbing pattern on the next row. Now the knits keep their continuity here, and the purls, what you get is garter stitch there. And if you really look closely, you can see that there's a change. But here I've done the ribbing just like that. The color change here and here by knitting across. I knit across the first row of the red and the first row of the gray later in stockinette, and then resumed the ribbing pattern. And there are no color blips. But you do see that you get all of the blips on this side of the fabric. So this works if you have a right side and a wrong side to your ribbing, but it's not going to work if you need the fabric to be reversible. In that case, you just have to live with the color blips, and they will occur on both sides of the fabric, so both sides will match. Garter stitch fabric is reversible, and while we typically say that garter stitch is the same on both sides of the fabric, it's actually not. If you look at it from the side, you'll have this ridge right here is offset by this ridge here by one row. So you get a ridge sticking out here and one sticking out here and one sticking out here. Every time you knit across these stitches to create garter stitch, you're purling across the back side of the stitch. So you can create garter stitch by purling. I've created half of this is knit garter stitch. I've knit across all of these stitches until I get to the middle, and then I purled across all of them, and you can see how you get that same one row offset that you get by comparing the front side to the back side. So this is why when you work garter stitch in stripes, you also get color blips. And if you're always changing color at the same edge, you're going to always get the blips on only one side of the fabric. So let's change color and then continue with the garter stitch pattern. So I've knit across these stitches, and anytime we do that, anytime we knit across while we change color, the color change is perfect. But on the back side, again, you're going to get those blips. And you're going to see that when I purl across, I'm going to get them on this side of the fabric. So this time I have the purl blips over here, but if I look on the back side, then the color change is perfect. So to create garter stitch that is reversible, has blips on both sides of the work, you can do one of two things. One is that when you change colors, you can alternate between which edge you change the color. So for example, you could work 5 rows all in garter stitch, and then join a color on this side, and then work 5 rows in garter stitch, then change colors on this side, back and forth. Every time you change color, the blips will be on one side of the fabric, and then the next time they'll be on the other side of the fabric. You can do that, or you can do something like this, where you alternate between working knit garter and purl garter, and you can always change on the same, your color on the same edge, and you'll get fabric that is reversible because you'll have blips on both sides, but it will be in a different way. So this is part of a blanket that a baby blanket that I'm working on for a gift. And this is what I've done with color changing and garter stitch. So here I've got 3 stitches of knit garter, purl garter, knit garter, purl garter, all the way across. So I start and end with a knit garter. And then in the center, I've got 15 stitches I ended with a knit garter. So I started with this section with a purl garter, knit garter, purl garter, and then the left-hand side is just like this. When you turn it over, instead of having the blips in the first and last and the nice stripe here, it's the opposite. So you get the blippy one in the middle and then the 2 smooth stripe ones in the center. So this creates a reversible fabric, but it also creates these vertical divisions that kind of cuts up the very horizontal nature of garter stitch. If you have a right and wrong side to your fabric, like this little shawl that I've got here is worked in garter stitch, and I worked stripes in red every so often, and I always changed up at this edge up here. So I would change colors here, and I'd work all the way there and back, and then I would switch. So on this side of the fabric, I do get the blips, but I don't mind because this is not a side that is typically shown while I'm wearing it. You can see in this little swatch, I've done 1 row of the maroon color 4 different times, and I've done it in a different way. So the first stripe, I just maintained stockinette. The purl blips, of course, are on the back. For this next one here, when I changed to the maroon color, I purled across these stitches, and then I resumed working in stockinette. So you get the smooth transition from maroon to gray, but from gray to maroon, then you get the purl bumps where the maroon are the smiles and the gray are the frowns. In this stripe, I switched the color and I worked in stockinette across that color. And then on the next row, when I was switching back to gray, then I had the row of purls going across the front. And then for this final one, I switched to purls when I switched the color, and then I did 1 more row so that I'd have 2 purl rows on the right side of the fabric. So when I switched to the maroon, I was purling on the right side. It would be knitting on the wrong side. And then when I switched back to the gray, again, I have the purls on the right side of the work. It would be knit on the wrong side. So then you get this little wider band of texture that's framed by the maroon stitches. So you can get different effects deliberately if you want them. As we've seen, there is no getting around the color blips when you change colors, but you can control the blips as well as use them to your advantage as a design feature. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or you can join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Roxanne. There's a link to that down in the description box below. YouTube thinks you might like one of my previous videos, which you can click on over here. And if you're not already a subscriber, you can click on my face over here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.